Hanio felt as if he was undergoing a medical checkup for his heart, and he gradually started to relax and enjoy it. There was something inexpressibly funny here. He simply could not be bothered to put up a fight. Well? Still 68. Okay, he's got nerves of steel, this one. I'm amazed. First time I've seen anything like it. It was worth all that effort to hunt him down. The man tucked his gun away in his suit and then spoke to Hanio in an entirely different, gentle tone. Please make yourself comfortable. It was just a little test, which you passed with flying colours. That really was amazing. That's quite some nerve you have. Stupendous results. The man stepped back to pull up a chair and sat down by the bed, looking quite friendly now. With the unexpected change in circumstances, Kaoru stopped crying and emerged from the shadow of the bed. "Would you mind telling me who you guys are?" said Hanio. He noticed the third button of his pyjama top was undone. As he did it up, he felt something jab his fingers. He took it out and examined it. A gleaming hairpin. The nurse must have dropped it there earlier. Aha, quite the ladies' man. The first man grinned and lit a cigarette. I asked who you were. Hanyo repeated. We hope to be clients of yours. We want to buy what you're selling. What? That's not a very nice way to address your clients. After all, we've come to purchase the very thing you've put up for sale. Is it so strange that potential clients should turn up on your doorstep? Couldn't you have thought up a less troublesome way to hire me? Hanio was exasperated. He fumbled to light a cigarette. The first man took out his pistol and pulled the trigger. Out popped a flame, which he held right under Hanio's nose. So it was all a silly game. Well, there are all sorts of tricks you use when testing someone, the man replied with a kindly expression that suggested he was, at heart, a good person. I hope you'll forgive us, kid, he said to Kaoru. Sorry about having to rough you up a bit earlier in the apartment. We felt we had to pull out all the stops. We simply had to get hold of Hanio here as quickly as possible. It's not as if we had any other options, and we knew Hanio couldn't give a fig about his own life. What does give a fig mean? Kaoru asked timorously. Give a fig means give a fig. You mean you've never heard that expression before? Honestly, school kids these days. No wonder people slag off education in Japan now. Come on, boy, time to go home. Hanio is quite safe. We have no intention of doing anything illegal. And don't snitch to the police on the way home. If you try anything, I might well have to exchange this toy pistol for a real one. I bet you wouldn't enjoy going to school with your stomach full of daylight. If you pumped my stomach full of holes, I'd fit the holes with lenses so people could take a peep for 10 yen a time. It'd be a good way of getting pocket money. Stop your funny stuff and get yourself home. Goodbye, Kaoru murmured, looking anxiously at Hanio. I'll be fine. Don't worry. You were pretty pushy too, eh? When you first visited me at my place. I'll be in touch again soon, so rest easy and go home. Okay. Kaoru's shadow disappeared round the door. So you mean that kid was a client too? It was actually his mother who bought my life. Wow! The first man seemed incredibly impressed. His companion sat himself down on another chair, finally assured, it seemed, that it was safe to relax. Now, if you're going to talk to me about something you didn't want the boy to hear, shall we have a drink to go with it? Said Hanyo. I've actually been advised by my doctor that alcohol is good for me. Some patient, eh? Hanyo produced a bottle of scotch from under his bed, with some glasses. He roughly wiped the dust off them with his sheet and handed one to each of the men. They listened apprehensively to the glugging of whiskey as he poured it into the glasses. The three raised their glasses and drank solemnly. Right then, to business, said the first man. A reward of 2 million yen if you're successful. In the event of failure, you just keep the advance payment of 200,000. How does that sound? You mention a reward if I succeed, but succeeding will mean I forfeit my life. So what you pay me will amount only to 200,000. Don't jump to conclusions. If this job goes well, you won't have to pay for it with your life. You'll get the 2 million. So give me the lowdown. Hanyo sat cross-legged on the bed and sipped on his drink as he settled down to hear their story. Where to begin? As the first man started to speak, Hanyo noticed the creases around his eyes, testament to both hardship and a heart of gold. Neither our names nor our occupations can be divulged. You will understand, of course, given the nature of what we are asking you to do. In any case, as you see, we are Japanese. But in fact, our story has nothing to do with Japan. Rather, it concerns the embassies of two other, quite different countries. Let's call them Country A and Country B. Now, the wife of the ambassador of Country A is a renowned beauty, and one evening she held a party at the embassy to which she and her husband had invited ambassadors from various nations around the world. For an embassy, such an event is no more extraordinary than if you and I were to invite guests round to play mahjong. That evening, the ambassador's wife greeted the guests wearing an elaborate emerald green evening dress with a long train. An imperial prince was in attendance, so it was a black tie party with everyone in full regalia. I am not at liberty to disclose the nature of our connection to this particular event at the embassy. Now, as you will appreciate, an evening dress embroidered in emerald green requires accessories in exactly the same colour. The wife of the ambassador of Country A was in possession of an exquisite necklace, a most wonderful piece that comprised 35 magnificent emeralds interspersed with small diamonds. The dancing began. The lights in the banqueting hall were dimmed, and the guests were swept up in the flow of things. But as the party drew to a close, the ambassador's wife suddenly noticed that the necklace was no longer draped around her neck. She kept her composure, and hardly any of the guests realized what had happened. Those who did notice merely assumed she had removed it at some point. Half the guests had left early, while the dancing was still in progress, so the ballroom was already quieting down as the party came to a formal end. Slightly pale, she nevertheless saw each person off with a brave smile. When the last guest had left, she fell sobbing into her husband's arms. "Oh, this is terrible, just terrible. My emerald necklace has been stolen." The necklace had cost an absolute fortune, so this was a serious theft. But, she explained, she could hardly have created an embarrassing scene over its sudden loss right there in the middle of the party when she was entertaining all those guests. The ambassador himself turned white at this news, stunned. This man was by no means a stingy person. Indeed, it was said that he had a considerable fortune back home, and had only taken up the role of ambassador as a hobby. There was no reason he should get upset over just a necklace. But the truth was, the ambassador had a serious problem that he had kept even from his wife. To clarify what I mean by this, let me explain a little about the emerald as a precious stone. Most jewels are valued in accordance with the flawlessness of their surface. It is only with emeralds that this is not the case. An emerald is always naturally flawed. It has what they call inclusions. These inclusions are one of the emerald's natural charms. The effect is often likened to peering into an utterly green sea. There is even aesthetic value that accrues in the different configurations produced by the flaws. You might say that emeralds, unlike diamonds, have something sensual about them. If you consider these dark internal fissures as giving this beautiful green gem its life force, it isn't hard to go one step further and imagine that the emerald embodies some sort of organic mystery. Now, when the ambassador first made a gift of this necklace to his wife, one man-made emerald had in fact been placed in among the natural ones. The artificial emerald was truly splendid, so perfectly formed in terms of its fissures and coloration that it was impossible to distinguish it from the other 34. However, in reality, the flaws in this single man-made stone had been deliberately structured in such a way as to form a cipher key that allowed the ambassador to decode the highly classified telegrams that his home nation, Country A, would send him personally to read. This particular emerald constituted a prism. Light passed through the maze of smoky, dark fissures and was refracted onto the surface of the telegram so as to rearrange the writing into intelligible lines. The ambassador had earlier become aware of someone intercepting the telegrams sent to him from his home nation, which was why he came up with the idea of inserting this cipher key into the one emerald. He arranged with his wife to keep the necklace in his care, and whenever she required it for a party or some such event, he would take it out of the safe. She, of course, was unaware of the secret. Noticing how pale he had turned, she said, "Who could it possibly be? Imagine taking such a thing so brazenly from under my nose. And to think that tonight's guests were limited exclusively to ambassadors and to Japan's most distinguished ladies and gentlemen. When do you think it was taken?" A slight quaver was discernible in the ambassador's voice. "During the dance. No other time would have been possible." "Whom did you dance with? How many people?" 5, maybe 6. Try to remember, all of them." "Well, the first was the prince. I think we can leave him out. Who else?" "Next was the foreign minister of Japan. It wouldn't have been him, surely. Next, the ambassador of Country B. Now it could have been him." The ambassador bit his lip. A ruthless espionage battle was being waged in Tokyo between Country A and Country B, so naturally the ambassador of Country B seemed the obvious suspect. People had been tipsy, the room was crowded and only dimly lit, and the music had been in full swing. The ambassador of Country B might be a big fatso, but he had absurdly delicate fingers. He was quite capable of loosening the necklace from around the slender white throat of the wife of the ambassador of Country A without her being aware of it. That night, the ambassador and his wife tried to decide whether they should inform the police, but they could not make up their minds. As day broke, and they found themselves exhausted from lack of sleep, a servant came in with a silver tray, on which lay a plain brown envelope. "This came through the letterbox this morning, sir." They opened it to discover the emerald necklace inside. Needless to say, the ambassador's wife was deliriously happy. Someone was obviously playing a prank on us. But how very cruel of them. Whoever it was, they ought to feel thoroughly ashamed of themselves. What diplomat would carry out such a ruse? "Are you sure it's the same necklace?" "Yes, quite sure." She held out the beautiful 35 emerald necklace so that it caught the light of the morning sun and jiggled it slightly. The ambassador took the necklace from her and looked for the emerald that concerned him. He could tell immediately that stone had been exchanged for a natural emerald. Things might have worked out a little better if the ambassador had revealed the secret of the emerald to his wife there and then. The first man continued with his story. But in this regard, the ambassador was a true gentleman of the old school. No matter how energetically his wife helped him with his official embassy business, he preferred to keep highly classified information entirely to himself. The ambassador immediately sent a telegram to his country requesting that, since the cipher key had been stolen, all future coded telegrams should be reformulated in an entirely new way. With that, he had resolved any problems that might arise in the future. But there was still the problem of telegrams that had been sent already. If they were intercepted, decoded, and their contents made public, this could well trigger a major international incident. There was no doubt in his mind that some other party had become aware of the emerald's secret and had stolen it. If the material was decoded and revealed immediately, the ambassador reasoned, the situation would already be irredeemable. But a delay of 1 day would mean a ray of hope, and nothing happening in 2 days or more would ensure that the ray became even stronger. Such a delay would suggest that the other party feared retaliation in the event of publication, or at the very least that they were aware of some other reason why it could not be revealed. But even if that were the case, he would never be able to get them to return whatever material they had stolen. And anyway, whoever had taken it would no doubt immediately have made lots of copies to send back to their own country. Even if he managed to get 1 set of copies back, it really wasn't going to solve anything. The ambassador was pulling his hair out. Every day he felt on tenterhooks. There seemed no other option but to await their next move. But no, he suddenly realized he had 1 trick left up his sleeve. If Country A were to steal Country B's cipher key, that is, Country B's equivalent of Country A's emerald, it might be possible to do a deal. Country A was already busily intercepting telegrams being sent from Country B, but for the moment they couldn't make head nor tail of the code. There wasn't a day to lose. The ambassador decided he should take the initiative and steal their key as quickly as possible. The only question was, where was it? Country B had managed not only to identify Country A's most closely guarded secret, their emerald key, but also to swipe it from under their very noses. This had, of course, only been possible thanks to the magnificent, renowned spy network of Country B. But Country A had its own espionage system that the ambassador knew to be every bit as good. It was surely only because they had not put their minds to it that they had not yet found the secret key being used by Country B. The ambassador put out word to his spies that Country B's key must be tracked down and seized within 2 days. Country A's spies had been keeping the embassy of Country B under surveillance for quite some time already, but they had found nothing in particular that set it apart from other embassies. There was only one possible distinguishing feature. The ambassador of Country B had the habit of staying up late at night in his library to study. Maybe it was then, the spies wondered, that the ambassador of Country B decoded the telegrams sent from his own country. The ambassador was also famous for being inordinately fond of carrots. On his desk was a glass filled with about 20 carrot sticks, which he would sprinkle with salt and munch on whenever he was hungry. Country A's spies had obtained this information from a vegetable shop that provided the Country B embassy with a constant supply of the very best carrots. Breaking a secret code and carrots. Now that combination almost makes you laugh. A certain spy of Country A, someone exceptionally skilled at what he did, found himself wondering if this combination might be not entirely fortuitous. Let us call this man, the first to infiltrate the Country B embassy, Agent X1. Though born in one of the smaller nations of Europe, he had received a thorough education in espionage in Country A. He belonged to no one nation, however, and was in possession of 8 fictional personal histories. Before he found his way into the embassy of Country B, Agent X1 met secretly with the ambassador of Country A. "I am confident I will find the key tonight and deliver it to you," he told the ambassador. "What's your plan?" "I will sample the carrots of the ambassador of Country B," the man said, brimming with self-assurance. This was the last time the ambassador ever saw Agent X1 alive. He was discovered dead in the embassy of Country B. It was announced in the media that a thief of unknown origin had broken into the embassy and had committed suicide there with potassium cyanide. There were no further developments in the matter. Several days went by, and the ambassador of Country A was somewhat relieved to see that the embassy of Country B still had not released the contents of the intercepted confidential telegrams. But of course, this did not give him complete peace of mind. Country B might be aiming to make things public in a month or even a year, waiting for the most politically opportune moment. The ambassador of Country A called in a second man, Agent X2, to poke around. He too disappeared under similar circumstances. Word had it that, just like Agent X1, he also met the ambassador of Country A before taking his leave and informed him, "The carrots hold the key." And then another man, Agent X3, disappeared in a similar fashion. Finally, the ambassador of Country A had no option but to acknowledge how serious matters had become. Obviously, there was something going on with the carrots. It was said that the ambassador of Country B had the supply replenished every night, but no one knew exactly why. Moreover, from the scant information at his disposal, the ambassador of Country A surmised that the agents had all got as far as stealing a carrot stick from the bunch in the glass on the desk, but the moment they put it in their mouths, they died on the spot, with symptoms, apparently, of potassium cyanide poisoning. This would suggest that maybe only 1 or 2 of the 20 carrot sticks in the glass were without the poisonous coating. But only the ambassador could tell which ones they were, allowing him to pop them in his mouth and crunch away to his heart's content. Even though it was pretty clear that the carrots were the clue to the cipher key, there was no way of telling which of the 20 sticks were free from poison. I might also add that the 3 spies who had died were what they call intangible cultural assets, each of whom cost millions to train. The ambassador of Country A could hardly sacrifice any more such experts to no purpose. So, this is where you come in. We want you to smuggle yourself into the embassy, identify which carrot stick is not poisoned, take a bite, and by doing so, obtain the key to break the code. How does that strike you? As you see, we are Japanese, but we feel grateful for what Country A has done for us, and that's why we wish to buy your life, and so repay our debt. If things go well, I suppose you'll end up with a huge reward too, said Hanyo. Naturally. If that weren't the case, we wouldn't have come chasing after you, pretending to be gangsters when we're old enough to know better. I see. Hanyo nonchalantly blew a puff of cigarette smoke toward the ceiling. Well, how about it? You have a 1 in 20 chance. Do you think you might pull it off? Actually, there's something else going on here, Hanyo said, clearly lost in thought. You said just now that the Country A embassy has been intercepting copies of Country B's top-secret telegrams for some time, right? Yes, of course. If I can hazard a guess, they are completely worthless in that form. Why do you say that? As long as we find the key. No, we should direct our attention to the paper, not the key. Has the Embassy of Country A managed to obtain any of the paper on which the Embassy of Country B receives its telegrams? I'm not sure. You need to make sure. We'll have to wait till tomorrow to find out, I guess. I might be dying then, so let me at least get a good night's sleep. All right, go home now. Come and pick me up in the morning. What if you were to run away from us? No, tonight we're staying put. As you wish. The nurse might get a turn when she comes to take my temperature in the morning, but I suppose I can pretend you're relatives who came to visit and stayed overnight. Rather unwelcome relatives. So we're agreed. Tomorrow morning one of you needs to go to the Embassy of Country A first thing and check if they have any paper from Country B in their possession. Until then, there's nothing to be done. Hanyo spoke confidently, then yawned broadly. He settled down on the pillow, and before long he was snoring. He has nerves of steel, said one of the men. The 2 overnight guests exchanged glances, full of admiration. Next morning, it was a perfect spring day, and quite cloudless. Hanyo managed to wangle a permit from the doctor to leave the hospital. While the first man was away at the embassy, he used the time to quietly shave his beard before the bathroom mirror. With his companion away, the second man suddenly sprang to life and became talkative. His admiration for Hanyo was all too clear, but everything he said was unbelievably banal and cliched. Ha! Such readiness in the face of death is commendable. You have the heart and soul of a warrior. For breakfast the man enjoyed a cream bun, which he had got the nurse to go out and buy for him. Hanyo watched in fascination as he crammed it into his guileless mouth, and as he bit into the bun, a crescent of yellow cream oozed out from the side like the rising sun. For the first time in ages, Hanyo had encountered something about human life that tickled him. From what he could deduce, some spies from Country A, one of the most advanced nations in the world, had been responsible for some momentary but catastrophic oversight, and this had led inexorably to their own deaths. Of course, whether he was correct in his deduction remained to be seen. When he applied shaving lotion, his reflection in the mirror looked so youthful and radiant that even he found it captivating. He had the face of a self-indulgent young man from a family of means, without a single care or responsibility in the world. Outside the window, partially opened, cherry blossoms swayed in the breeze. The first man came back, out of breath. "Great news! They do have some of the paper in question. The spies of Country A are assiduous in their work. Ah, that reminds me. You've been asked to meet the ambassador of Country A before you go on your do-or-die mission and break into the embassy. What time should I go and meet him?" They said any time between 10 and 11. "Right." Hanyo looked at his watch. "I have to drop by somewhere first, so I should be able to get there at 10:30. "What do you mean, you have to go somewhere? Incidentally, you have some soap behind your ears." "Thanks." All this uncalled-for interference had distracted Hanyo this morning. But now he rubbed behind his ears with a towel, and while he was about it, wiped his chin. Some drops of red were left on the towel. He had nicked himself with the razor. The blood brought back memories of the vampire woman, and his heart tightened. Probably never again would he be able to savour that sense of deep immersion in a languid, sweet bath of death. Quite possibly it was in order to bestow that very favour upon him that she had purchased his life. "Where do you have to go?" The first man pressed him for an answer. "No questions. Just come with me. I've some shopping to do, that's all. A certain amount of preparation is required if you're going to kick the bucket." At a loss how to respond, the man adopted a serious expression. This amused Hanyo. As he left the hospital, his nurse warned, "Now don't go on the rampage just because you're going out. You're not being formally discharged yet. I think I managed to prove to you yesterday that I'm 100% healthy." At this, the nurse pinched Hanyo's arm. Even the tingling that this left had more of a sparkle outside in the spring sunlight. The three of them might have been a group of friends off to the horse races as they walked down the broad slope toward town, a mixture of amusement and tension in their faces. "We need to go to a quality greengrocer, one with only the freshest vegetables," announced Hanyo to his two companions. "Somewhere around Aoyama, perhaps." They hailed a taxi and all climbed in. It was a while since Hanyo had been into town. Signs of death were nowhere to be seen. People were soused in everyday life, right up to their necks. You might say they walked around like human pickles. When I'm in that world, I'm a sour pickle, Hanyo thought. But even as a pickle, he had never amounted to more than an appetizer served with a drink. The dull routine of 3 solid meals a day was not his bag. That's fate for you. What can you do? At Keitont's store, Hanyo bought some carrots that had already been peeled and cut into sticks, and he had someone place them in a polyethylene bag that was frosted from being kept in the fridge. The two men looked on with serious expressions. "Is that all you're buying?" said the first man. "Yup," Hanyo replied. "Right then, let's go to the embassy of Country A." Hanyo's pride was a tiny bit hurt that they had to enter through the tradesman's entrance at the back of the splendid chalky limestone embassy. Passing through the kitchen, they ascended a grubby stairway. They opened a door and immediately came into a magnificent Edwardian-style study. His two companions stood to attention. On the opposite side of an imposing desk sat a distinguished-looking grey-haired gentleman. He was sitting very straight. "Sir, we have brought the person we mentioned." "You have done well. I am the ambassador of Country A." The gentleman courteously extended his hand to Hanyo. When Hanyo shook it, he felt as if he were grasping a dried flower. It seemed so soft that the merest grasp would crush it. Even so, he imagined numerous thorns sticking into his own palm. "Here is the advance," the ambassador then said. A cheque lay on the table. The ambassador quickly filled in the amount to be paid, 200,000 yen, signed his name, and gave it to Hanyo before the ink had even dried. "Right, ambassador. Let's get right down to business," said Hanyo. "Is that blank paper you have there from Country B?" "Yes, it is. We got some ready for you. Could I please ask you to get someone to type out one of the intercepted telegrams from Country B, making sure it fits neatly within the borders of the blank sheet?" "Of course." The ambassador rang a bell to summon the typist, and handed her a copy of one of the intercepted telegrams and the blank sheet of paper. "I've got a copy of the telegram here," he said to Hanyo. "Have a read." Hanyo could tell at a glance that the telegram consisted of a meaningless jumble of words. Even if it were translated directly into Japanese, it would make no sense. As they waited for the typist to do her job, Hanyo, the ambassador, and Hanyo's two companions sat facing each other in complete silence. The wall was decorated with portraits of major politicians from Country A, and the desk was surrounded by bookshelves with gorgeous old leather-bound editions, among them the collected works of Benjamin Disraeli. A sickly sweet odour, redolent of Westerners, hung in the air. The rather formal, middle-aged typist showed no expression as she returned with the typed sheet before taking her leave. "So," said the ambassador. "Right." Hanyo took one of the carrot sticks from the still icy polyethylene bag and tossed it into his mouth. The colour of carrots comes from carotenoids, which can be converted by the body into vitamin A. The deeper the carotenoid pigmentation, the more abundant the potential amount of vitamin A. The one constituent in carrots that works to destructive effect is the enzyme ascorbinase, which breaks down vitamin C. On the other hand, carrots contain no starch whatsoever. Consequently, the saliva-based enzyme ptyalin, which changes starch into maltose, has no effect on carrots. Hanyo had a hunch that the secret to ungarbling the letters might be found in the ingenious way in which ascorbinase and ptyalin, two elements that have no effect on each other, combined. There had to be some connection with the reciprocal reactions of these two elements with other chemicals that coated the telegram paper. Where ascorbinase has no effect, ptyalin would produce one chemical reaction, and where ptyalin has no effect, ascorbinase would produce its own separate chemical reaction. Hanyo gave the carrot a good chew, then spat the masticated mush out onto the telegram and smeared it about. They watched as a coded text emerged from among the words. Astonishing! The ambassador was in code-breaking heaven. He began to nod and emitted a series of contented grunts. "We have lots more carrots. There are plenty of other telegrams I want deciphered. I'm so relieved. This means we have nothing to fear in our dealings with Country B. They won't know what's hit them. It looks like it's ended in a complete tie." Hanyo was still chewing away. "It could do with a bit more salt, but I think it would work well served as a snack with a drink. Could I trouble you for a glass of whiskey?" "You'll get your drink later when it's all over. Right now, I wouldn't want anything to affect the chemical reaction." The ambassador's eyes shone with delight as he gazed in anticipation at Hanyo, who munched away on the carrots like a hungry horse. Once the chewed remnants of all the carrots had been thickly smeared over all the telegrams, Hanyo was led into a separate room where he received a cheque for a further 2 million yen. His two companions also received a cheque each. From the happy look on their faces, it was a hefty sum. the ambassador offered a whiskey to Hanyo. "How on earth did you manage to do it?" he asked. "I'm dying to know how you figured out a plan of action that involved no risk to life." It was beyond Hanyo's ability to spell out all the complex details in English, so he asked the elder, more talkative of his two companions, to interpret for him. The man was more than happy to step in, and his English turned out to be pretty fluent, far superior to the basic language skills that Hanyo had expected. It ought to be said that Hanyo did not mince his words, so the man did some editing where appropriate. "First of all, I'm amazed at how sloppy Country A has been. Losing 3 key intelligence officers like that, why, that must have cost millions. On the other hand, those guys were complete mugs, so your country's probably better off without them. I'd say your biggest mistakes come down to avarice, obliviousness to the essential simplicity of things, and obsession with trivial details. Am I wrong?" 3 intelligence officers went into the embassy of Country B, one after the other, to try out the carrots. They were on the right track, at least up until that point. I should tell you that I had a look at a newspaper article reporting the first death. How did the headline go? "Dumb thief enters embassy of Country B, eats poisoned carrots, drops dead." The article went on to describe how the victim was found with a piece of carrot laced with potassium cyanide in his mouth. It included the ambassador's explanation that some feed for animal experiments they were conducting had been accidentally left out on the table. The thief must have been hungry and eaten it. Everyone who read the article must have thought it was hilarious. Now, this is where you all had the wool pulled over your eyes, and, as a consequence, a second spy suffered the same fate. Your mistake was to believe, even after the first death, that the ambassador of Country B was continuing to place poisoned carrots on his table night after night and was lying in wait for the next thief. But I ask you, did anyone actually see the first spy die after putting a carrot in his mouth? Mightn't someone have crammed it down his throat? The fact is, the ambassador of Country B managed to fool you all into thinking a special carrot was required to break the code you were after. He convinced you that the problem centered around how to distinguish between poisonous and safe carrots. He was running circles round you. The moment I heard the story, I could smell a rat. Did it never occur to you that they might be nothing more than ordinary carrots? Even a child could have come up with that idea, but you thought it must all be so incredibly complicated that people ended up losing their lives. That's why I came here with another plan up my sleeve. First of all, I wanted to conduct an experiment with some completely ordinary carrots. I assumed that most carrots in a bunch would be effective. But if my experiment had failed, and I'd ended up having to go and try a carrot laced with potassium cyanide, I would have died without regret. When you're putting your life on the line, there's no use fussing over a few carrots. Actually, I might as well admit right now that I loathe carrots. That dull shade of orange, such a crude, boorish colour, and the smell of them, especially when they're raw, truly disgusting. I detested my father, and when I was a child I'd watch him crunch away on raw carrots. I used to think that if he carried on like that, he'd turn into a horse, and I swore I'd never allow anything so vulgar to pass my lips for the rest of my life. At some point, that childish way of thinking developed into a visceral revulsion. As I grew up, whenever I found myself having to eat a beef stew or some such dish that contained carrots, I would be overcome with disgust. It was worse than peering into the depths of a toilet bowl. And if I came across that novel, Poil de Carotte, Carrot Head, by Jules Renard, on the shelves of a bookshop, the author's insensitivity would astonish me. In short, if I had a choice, I guarantee I'd rather get a hole in the head than eat carrots. But at the present moment, my life lies in my client's hands rather than my own, so I have made an exception and opted, albeit unwillingly, for the carrots. 2 million yen is probably about the right price. And now a few words for you, Mr. Ambassador. Stop overcomplicating the way you think about things. Life and politics are generally simple, much more simple, shallow even, than you imagine. Of course, I'm aware that my attitude might be different if I weren't prepared to meet death at any moment. It's only the desire to live as long as possible that makes everything seem complicated and mysterious. And now, I take my leave. I doubt I'll be seeing you again. I promise never to discuss the work I've done here with any other party, so please refrain from sending any of your fine intelligence officers to keep a watch on me. And please do not ask for my help ever again. I'm not going to be any use to you in the future. The petty political squabbles between Country A and Country B do not interest me in the slightest. I imagine it's only because you have too much time on your hands that all you ever do is pick fights with each other. Goodbye. By the time the other man had finished interpreting, Hanyo was almost out of the splendid door, his head respectfully lowered. Back at the hospital, he quickly gathered up his belongings and checked out. Taking care that he was not being followed, he went back to his old apartment and immediately started packing up his things there. So you've decided finally to leave, just when you have made such a good recovery? Well, I'm sorry to see you go. I'm afraid I can't return the half-year's rent in advance you gave me, said the super. Keep it, said Hanyo. For a young guy, you're pretty loaded, aren't you? The words rolled jealously inside the super's mouth. He seemed to be retasting bits of food still caught in there somewhere, like a ruminating cow. There was not much to pack. Hanyo had hardly any books to speak of, and he always threw away clothes that he grew tired of, so all he had to do was to gather together his furniture and pack everything else into 3 large cardboard boxes. He came upon the toy mouse he had once shared dinner with and tossed it into one of them. A small removal truck he had booked earlier waited in front of the apartment. The driver gazed idly at a scrawny-looking cherry tree at the entrance to the house opposite. It was the cherry blossom season, after all. But the tree could not have had more than 10 blossoms on it. Since no help was forthcoming, Hanyo brought the furniture down by himself, one piece at a time. It may have been that he was not physically back to normal yet, or perhaps the carrots had not agreed with him, but he was drenched in sweat after carrying down just 2 chairs. The super, lurking somewhere inside, also failed to come to his aid. As he struggled down the stairs, trying to support the table on one shoulder, he suddenly felt the weight lift off him, and he looked up in surprise to see the elder of his 2 recent companions lending him a hand. "Let me help. You're still getting back your strength." Then Hanyo watched as the second of his 2 former companions came springing nimbly up the stairs. "Do you want me to carry these boxes down?" he asked. It took no time for everything to be loaded into the truck. "Thanks very much," said Hanyo, "but I told you not to come after me." "We weren't coming after you," said the first man. "We just thought we ought to help. It's our experience that people always turn tail and try to run away after they've done us some act of kindness. It's perfectly understandable. We'll leave you in peace after this, but if you ever do find yourself in need of a favor, please call us any time. We'll come straight away." "I take it you carry guns?" "Naturally." The man spoke emphatically, presenting his business card with an expression of genuine integrity. There was a name, Makoto Uchiyama, an address and a telephone number, but no company position. "Where are you moving to?" he asked. His expression was the picture of kindly concern. "No point asking me that. I don't even know myself," Hanyo said over his shoulder as he climbed into the passenger seat. The truck began to move off almost reluctantly, leaving behind the 2 men waving under the cherry tree. "Where to?" the driver asked, showing little interest. "Setagaya." Hanyo said the first thing that came into his head. The truth was, he had no destination in mind. He had 2 checks in his pocket, one for 2 million yen and one for 200,000. Gazing out at the spring streets, hazy with pollen. He calculated for the first time how much he had brought in so far since beginning his business. 100,000 from the old man at the start. 500,000 from the incident that had ended in the woman committing suicide. 230,000 from the vampire woman's son. 2,200,000 from this last escapade. He had earned a total of 3,030,000 yen in no time at all. It worked out to about 1 million a month. Really not a bad business. His income was 10 times what he had earned as a copywriter. He had wasted some money on his apartment, but even what he had left guaranteed him a life of luxury for quite some time. Of course, he would have earned much more as a singer of popular songs or a movie star, but that kind of person had a lot more expenses. No way would their life have been as easygoing as his was. He got lots of attention from people with minimal effort on his part, and he had even had the pleasure of having his blood sucked out of him by a vampire. It occurred to him that now might be a good time to take a break from this life-for-sale business. Why not try leading a carefree and luxurious existence for a while in this part of town? If it turned out that he enjoyed a life that just drifted along with no purpose, he could carry on as he was. And if he decided he would prefer to die after all, he had the option of restarting the business. There could be no freer state of mind. He simply could not fathom why people got married and ended up trapped for life, or became company employees working at the beck and call of others. Better to spend all his money. If he found himself penniless, suicide was always there as an option. Suicide. When his thoughts arrived at this point, he found himself overtaken by a kind of psychological malaise. No matter how you looked at it, he reflected, to kill yourself just because you've suffered some setback required too much effort. If you've finally managed to carve some time out for yourself and flop out, you're hardly in the mood to get up and fetch a cigarette that lies just beyond your reach. Sure, you're dying for a smoke, but it remains just outside your grasp. In fact, it requires a huge effort to heave yourself up and fetch that cigarette, just like when you're asked to push a car that has broken down. That, in a nutshell, is suicide. "Where in Setagaya?" the driver asked as they passed along Tokyo's Ring Road No. 7. "Let's see. Some place with a real estate agent or employment agency. Anywhere like that will do. Are you telling me you haven't decided where you're moving to?" "Actually, no." Unbelievable. The driver did not look particularly surprised, despite his words. Hanio spotted a real estate agent on the corner of a junction to Umegaoka Station. Stuck to its glass door were slips of paper, advertising rooms, and houses for rent. "There. Stop there. Looks like you can park in front," the driver replied, with a muffled grunt. Hanio slid open the door of the shop with a clatter and was greeted by the real estate agent, a plump, fair-skinned woman of about 50. She was leafing through some papers at a desk. In a corner of the room were a cheap padded sofa and a couple of chairs. There was a vase containing some small artificial roses. A map of the whole district was stuck on the wall. "I'm looking for a room to rent," said Hanyo. "The best would be an annex, or something of that sort, where I could come and go freely without being a nuisance to anyone. Meals included, if possible. Is any such place available?" "Let's see. Nothing comes to mind immediately," replied the woman. "What's your budget roughly?" 50,000 a month. Perhaps a little higher. Of course, the cost of meals would be separate. One moment, please." While she was going through her files, the glass door suddenly slid open and a young woman in slacks came in. At the sight of her, the real estate agent openly scowled. The woman in slacks was oddly unsteady on her feet. Though probably not yet 30, she had a rather coarse complexion. Her features were fine, even chic, but the makeup she was wearing was all wrong for a Japanese woman. There was also a mismatch between her petite body and the breasts that filled out her sweater. The moment she entered, The older woman seemed to forget that Hanyo was there. "Do anything weird, and I'll call the police." The real estate agent fairly bristled as she made her threat. "Go ahead. I'm not going to do anything bad." The young woman slurred her speech. She turned one of the chairs round and then fell into it, her back toward Hanyo. "You just stop making such a nuisance of yourself. No one will want your place for the rent you're asking, and with all those ridiculous conditions. I don't care how high the commission is. It's not like it's our job to set you up with people. And even if it were, it would be up to you to find someone and bring him here so we could do the contract. But that would be beyond you, wouldn't it? It's just not going to happen. But it is your job to find someone for me. You have no right to say such horrible things. You haven't a clue whether I've got it in me or not." The young woman had barely got these words out before she slumped back in the chair and was soon snoring away. Her face in sleep was angelic. Her lips were slightly parted and appeared so soft that Hanyo was tempted to place his fingers on them. Only her snoring jarred. "She's acting funny. She must be high on something. Stupid girl. I should just notify the police. Would you mind tending the shop for a minute while I pop out? I'm worried how she might react when she comes round. She might start smashing things up. This is all just too much. What on earth is this all about?" Completely forgetting the truck he'd left waiting outside, Hanyo sat down. He wanted to hear her story. "This woman is the daughter of one of the most respectable families in the neighborhood. She lives in a big house with her parents, and she's their youngest. Her siblings are married with their own families. However, as the baby of the family, she's used to getting her own way. As a result, she's completely screwed up, and no one in their right mind would want to marry her. Her parents started out as wealthy landowners, but at the end of the war, they found themselves in straitened circumstances, and they began coming to me to sell off piecemeal the land and buildings they owned. In the end, they were left with nothing more than their own residence. So far, they've managed by hook or by crook to make ends meet through selling off their possessions. But now they're close to rock bottom. The latest idea is to make a living by renting out their tiny tea-house annex, but it's not going well. They just don't accept anything I do to try and help them. But it is Reiko here who has really been putting a spanner in the works, and I don't know what to do about it. The deposit she wants for that ramshackle old place is 500,000 yen, plus a rent of 100,000. She refuses to give way on that. Her other requirement is that the tenant has to be a young unmarried man. She won't even look at anyone I suggest. I came up with one prospective tenant, a company president, middle-aged, who was willing to pay the asking price because he liked the look of her. But then what did she do when he paid a visit to discuss arrangements but get absolutely wasted? I'm at the end of my rope. Try and put yourself in my shoes. I can't take it anymore. The idea of going to the police must have slipped her mind. She started to cry with her face buried in her sleeve. In the end, she was sobbing, with her head against the glass door plastered with advertisement slips. The door rattled as she sobbed. Probably it was the wind blowing against it. What with one person snoring and the other weeping, Hanyo was flummoxed. But eventually he stood up and placed a hand on the tearful older woman's shoulder. "I think I might be able to help you out." Wiping away her tears, she stared up at him. "Really? But only if I get something in return. If I'm to help you, I need to be able to stow all my possessions, and I've brought them all with me, in that annex you mentioned. If I don't like it, or if the people in the main house don't like me, I'll be out of there immediately. Have you just moved out of another place? See that truck waiting over there? It's got all my things in it." The wind had picked up, and the truck was parked under a cherry tree that was flailing about on the other side of a fence. The driver had got out and was once more idly taking in the blossoms. A hazy yellow pall tarnished the blue sky. A cat was walking along the top of the fence. It jumped across to the black branches of the tree, scrambled down the trunk, and slunk off, its body pummeled by the wind like a jellyfish tossed by the waves. It was a strange, bright afternoon. An afternoon in which something gigantic had been misplaced, a spring afternoon that felt empty and full of light. Hanyo had decided to give himself a break, yet here he was again, getting entangled in another bizarre situation. The world seemed so full of multiple twists and turns. No way could the Earth be described as a perfectly neat globe, he thought. One moment the land is pitted with sinkholes, the next moment a plateau suddenly rears up into a perpendicular cliff. To say that human life had no meaning was the easy part. But Hanyo was struck all over again by the huge amount of energy required to live a life filled with so much meaninglessness. The older woman shook Reiko by the shoulder. "Hey, this gentleman wants to rent your annex. He's young and single, just what you're after. Perfect for your requirements. You should show him round right away." Reiko's eyes opened, her head resting on the back of the chair, and looked up at him. A single thread of glistening drool spilled from her mouth. Hanyo found it repulsive, but also strangely erotic. Reiko struggled to her feet. At last. Finally, someone worth waiting for. She got up and gave the older woman a hug. "Can't you try and be happy for me? Why are you always so mean?" Her tone was emotionless and hollow, even if the words themselves were completely over the top. "This is why I find her such hard going," said the real estate agent, turning to Hanyo. "One moment she's a pain in the butt. Next thing, she's all sweetness and light." This time, she clearly had her business smile on. Reiko instructed the driver to leave Hanyo's belongings by the rear gate of the residence, which was the closest entrance to the annex. She then locked fingertips with Hanyo, guiding him along the stepping stones that led to the main house. They passed through grounds dense with trees. It was hard to believe that just beyond was the heavy traffic of Ring Road number 7. An elderly couple was sitting together in wicker chairs on the veranda of the main house. "Ah, welcome home, Reiko," said the old woman. "Hiya, I've got someone here who's going to rent the annex." "Well, that is good news. I'm afraid you will find it far from comfortable in our home, young man, but please do come in." The woman was small and elegant, and she greeted Hanyo courteously. The grey-haired old man by her side was obviously refined too, and like her, he was dressed in Japanese attire. He introduced himself with a friendly smile that put Hanyo at ease. "Pleased to meet you. My name is Kuramoto." Hanyo was led into a formal reception room and seated in the place reserved for a guest of honor, facing the decorative alcove. They served tea. He was treated with an almost inconceivable degree of old-fashioned courtesy. The furniture was of the highest quality. The thick rosewood shelf in the alcove displayed an incense burner and a cockatoo made of some precious stone. Also hanging there was a picture scroll depicting the legend of the peach blossom spring in the classical style, inscribed with a line of verse. "Our daughter is not much good for anything, but please don't hold it against her," the old man began. The old woman picked up the conversation. "And you know, for all her faults, she has the kind-heartedness of a saint. There is something innocent about her. It's only because she's had to struggle in this world with a heart too pure by half that she ended up taking Himena barbiturates. Actually, it's hymenol, mother." Reiko took no pleasure in having to spell things out. The mother was describing her almost 30-year-old daughter as if she were a slip of a girl. "Ah, is that right? Well, she takes that, and also that drug beginning with L." "It's LSD, mother." "I knew it was L something or other." "Fine, LSD. Sounds like the name of some sort of instant food, if you ask me. In any case, She takes that drug that's all the rage with youngsters these days, and then she hangs around the Shinjuku area at night, looking for her Prince Charming. Isn't that right, Reiko? That's enough, Mother. But the old woman wouldn't let up. For some reason, the child has a stubborn streak, and that's what differentiates her from her siblings. Her nature is good, and she's always keen to throw herself into everything. I think we should give her all the support we can. What right do old people have to tell young ones what they should do? We've been more than willing to indulge her a bit so she can work out things for herself. Of course, I realize it's our daughter I'm talking about, but if someone with such a sweetheart insists on devoting herself to remodeling the annex and is adamant about having just the right person to live there, who are we to object? And now she's found you. How lucky for her. It must be all thanks to the gods and the Buddhas. Reiko, why not show him the annex? Sure. Reiko stood up and once more latched her fingers, rather tryingly, onto Hanyo's, so that he was forced to rise unsteadily to his feet. The spring sunlight shone abundantly onto the garden through branches with still only a sparse covering of leaves. Skirting the shrubbery, where an occasional camellia was in bloom, they made their way back to the annex. Reiko threw open the clattering storm shutters. He was expecting his nose to be struck by the odour of mouldy tatami mats. However, there was no such smell. In fact, unusually for a tea house, there were no tatami mats to be seen. Instead, the space had been turned into a kitchen with a flooring of clay tiles decorated with an intricate pattern of fallen leaves. The adjoining reception room took Hanyo's breath away. On the floor lay a luxurious Tianjin carpet. A twill bedspread in a Persian design covered a French Indochinese bed fashioned from bamboo, and in the decorative alcove, which would normally contain a scroll and flower arrangement, there was a magnificent stereo system. Nestled in one corner of the room was a set of Vietnamese rosewood Louis XIV chairs decorated with mother-of-pearl, and next to them a standalone bronze lamp in the shape of a woman. The lower half of her body was covered in a graceful Art Nouveau arrangement of lily-of-the-valley leaves, while the upper half twisted to support the light in her hands. But the old woman wouldn't let up. For some reason, the child has a stubborn streak, and that's what differentiates her from her siblings. Her nature is good, and she's always keen to throw herself into everything. I think we should give her all the support we can. What right do old people have to tell young ones what they should do? We've been more than willing to indulge her a bit so she can work out things for herself. Of course, I realize it's our daughter I'm talking about, but if someone with such a sweetheart insists on devoting herself to remodeling the annex and is adamant about having just the right person to live there, who are we to object? And now she's found you. How lucky for her. It must be all thanks to the gods and the Buddhas. Reiko, why not show him the annex? Sure. Reiko stood up and once more latched her fingers, rather tryingly, onto Hanyo's, so that he was forced to rise unsteadily to his feet. The spring sunlight shone abundantly onto the garden through branches with still only a sparse covering of leaves. Skirting the shrubbery, where an occasional camellia was in bloom, they made their way back to the annex. Reiko threw open the clattering storm shutters. He was expecting his nose to be struck by the odour of mouldy tatami mats. However, there was no such smell. In fact, unusually for a tea house, there were no tatami mats to be seen. Instead, the space had been turned into a kitchen with a flooring of clay tiles decorated with an intricate pattern of fallen leaves. The adjoining reception room took Hanyo's breath away. On the floor lay a luxurious Tianjin carpet. A twill bedspread in a Persian design covered a French Indochinese bed fashioned from bamboo, and in the decorative alcove, which would normally contain a scroll and flower arrangement, there was a magnificent stereo system. Nestled in one corner of the room was a set of Vietnamese rosewood Louis XIV chairs decorated with mother-of-pearl, and next to them a stand-alone bronze lamp in the shape of a woman. The lower half of her body was covered in a graceful Art Nouveau arrangement of lily-of-the-valley leaves, while the upper half twisted to support the light in her hands. The walls were lined with thick damask, and a beautiful mirrored wine cabinet was set into a corner. A glance inside the doors revealed an array of exceptionally fine wines. "Now I see why the rent is so high," Hanyo said to himself. His companion seemed to read his mind. "It's obvious now, isn't it? The real estate agent woman has no idea what the inside of this place looks like. She's a complete idiot. Can you blame me for losing my temper when she goes on at me like that? I've put my heart and soul into creating this place. As you know, I live here all alone. Even when I go to Shinjuku, I don't hang out with anyone. And I haven't made any friends. It's only because I'm lonely that I do this. Is that so strange? Not at all. Interesting taste, though. Very unusual. All the objects you see set out here come from my dad's collection. I got them out of the family storehouse. Dad was a bit of a bad boy when he was young, but now he seems to have a more enlightened view of the world. Didn't he raise any objections about raiding his collection? Not at all. In this house, my word rules. He's terrified to go against me." And she suddenly let out a shrill laugh that seemed as if it would never end. There was a knock on the open storm shutter, and the elderly woman entered the room. She held a lacquered tray on which were laid 2 sheets of ornate high-quality paper, each of them folded in 2. "Here is the invoice and the contract. If you could be so kind," she said. The documents indicated that the deposit was 500,000 yen and the rent 100,000 per month. The words were written in the traditional oye style of handwriting, which emphasized a flowing script. "I have the money, but only as a check," Hanyo said. "It's past 3 o'clock now, so would you mind if I went to the bank tomorrow to cash it?" "Whichever is most convenient for you." And the old woman withdrew. Hanyo suddenly remembered his belongings by the gate. He was worried they might look shabby in a room furnished like this, and wondered whether to have them put into storage. "If you need any recommendations for where to store your things, I can advise you. I expect you'll need to do something with the furniture you brought with you," said Reiko, unprompted. She seemed to have a knack for reading people's minds. "How did you know what I was thinking? When I'm high, it just happens. I don't know why. I'm not normally so sensitive." At that point, they both ran out of things to say, and they fell into silence. The more he thought about it, the odder this house seemed. It was all so unfathomable. Why had she put together such a gorgeous room, and with such a huge bed? And why was she so fussy about the kind of person she wanted to rent the room to, given how expensive it was? Of course, she had to make a living, but even so it was hard to believe that a 30-year-old druggie would just be hanging around a real estate agent's in search of a tenant. She might not be exactly conventional, but she didn't seem to be off her rocker. It occurred to Hanyo that he might be the kind of man who, having just had one close call, was just fated to fall in with another kindred spirit. People who are lonely have the ability to immediately sniff out the loneliness in others. In that, they're no different from dogs. When Reiko first opened her sleepy eyes at the real estate agents, she must have immediately registered that Hanyo was not your average, healthy, practical human being. The odd thing is that only lonely people have a tendency to festoon their abodes with extravagant items. Hanyo was still living in his modest former apartment when he first found success in his life-for-sale business, and only after that did he acquire a taste for more luxurious living. Reiko's place suited him down to the ground, not least because its low ceiling lent the room the air of a magnificent tomb. "I would love to give my mind and body a rest here for a while. Why are you so tired?" I just am, that's all. How can anyone be tired of life, or of the very idea of being alive? It's not normal. Well, there's nothing else that makes you tired. Reiko gave a snort. I know what your problem is. You're tired of trying to die. Reiko might be having problems focusing her eyes, but her words were weirdly on target. Hanyo was lost for words. Reiko took out a large, sumptuous-looking volume from the bookcase and, resting it on her knee, flipped through its pages. Here, look. The book was a large, beautifully illustrated edition of 1001 Nights. The picture Reiko was showing him was from a tale about an incestuous relationship. The story concerned two siblings, a brother and sister, born of separate mothers who were infatuated with each other. They hid themselves from the eyes of the world in a magnificent sealed tomb deep in the ground where they could spend time making love to each other day and night. Eventually, they encountered the wrath of God and were consumed by heavenly flames. When the father located their hideaway and entered the tomb, all he found were their charred bodies embracing each other on the bed covered in richly embroidered silk. A picture showed their naked bodies, now reduced to black coal, but still recognizably human and locked in a sexual embrace, on a splendid, pristine bed without a single scorch mark. It suggested the abomination and ugliness of death, but also the fires of pleasure that had set the couple's beautiful bodies alight while they were alive. The two looked as if they had been consumed not by the fire of heaven's wrath, but by the flames of carnal pleasure that had lit up their lives. Burnt to a crisp, but still kissing, Reiko remarked. What a way to go! They must have died at the peak of happiness. Very nice, I'm sure. But what do you hope to attain by installing someone like me in a magnificent place like this? Asked Hanyo. After all, I'm only out for myself. I'll tell you, soon enough. I've only ever been looking for one thing, and I think I've almost got it. That night, Hanyo had time on his hands, so he telephoned Kaoru. Hey, where are you? I noticed you vacated your old apartment. The boy sounded in high spirits. His mother's death seemed not to have left much of a mark on his young heart. I moved out in a hurry, so I just thought I'd give you my new address and telephone number. You're sure no one's listening in on our conversation? I understand your concern, but who gives a damn? Have you started up your business again? I'm resting at the moment. Good. You should take it easy for a while. So, is there anything else in your life that's bothering you at the moment? The young boy was affecting quite a grown-up manner. If it all kicks off again, I'll let you know. Don't say things like that. Why can't you put your old life completely behind you? By the way, can I come and hang out with you soon? I'm a bit tied up at the moment. So you've taken up with another woman? You got it. Damn! You're incorrigible. If I get into trouble, I'll give you a call. You're the only person I can trust when things go bad. These words clearly tickled the boy's self-esteem. But you'll get annoyed if I save your life, won't you? That puts me in a difficult position. Okay, I'll wait for you to contact me. I'll leave you alone for now. Take it easy, he said, and hung up. The following day, Hanyo went to the bank and opened an account. He cashed his check, then returned home and paid Mrs. Kuramoto. Oh, how kind. Thank you so much. That'll really make my daughter happy. She's out at the moment. She's been looking for someone like you for so many years. The old woman smiled graciously at Hanyo from the door at the entrance to the house. She handed him the contract, which was wrapped inside a fancy purple crepe covering. I wonder if I could consult you on a certain matter, he asked. Of course. Would you care for some tea? And she ushered him warmly inside. Led into their peaceful living room, Hanyo instantly felt himself relax. All demons of the modern age had been swept away from that place. All except their daughter, Reiko. Mr. Kuramoto set aside the collection of Tang poetry that he had been reading. "You look well," he said. "Did you manage to get a good night's sleep?" "Yes, thank you." Hanyo nodded gently. There he had been, putting all his effort into hurrying toward death. But here were a husband and wife in no hurry to die. A scattering of cherry blossom petals, blown on the wind, lay in the garden. In the pleasant midday cool of a shaded room, the old man's white hand turned the pages of his Tang poetry book. These people were taking all the time in the world to weave together their own deaths, calmly, as if quietly knitting sweaters in preparation for the coming winter. Where did such tranquility come from? "Reiko must be quite a shock to you," said Mr. Kuramoto with a smile. "I am responsible for the child ending up like that. I hope you won't think too harshly of me." Hanyo stared blankly at Mr. Kuramoto. Mrs. Kuramoto brought some tea. "Go on, dear. Tell him the story," she said quietly. "A long time ago, I was a merchant seaman," Mr. Kuramoto began. "I rose to the rank of captain, but eventually I left the sea and became an executive in the shipping company, finally becoming company president. I bought up some land around here. My intention was to spend the rest of my life as a major landowner. But we lost the war, and it became impossible to make a living as a landlord, and things went from bad to worse. These days, if you really take good care of the land, your assets are worth billions. But things were different right after our defeat. Property tax meant I had to sell off a portion of my land, and I continued to sell it off one piece at a time until it was all cashed in. What a fool I was. Anyway, Reiko was born in 1939, the year after I gave up being a captain. She was my youngest daughter. I had become exhausted by my work as captain. In fact, I'd suffered what these days we would term a nervous breakdown, and I spent 3 weeks or so in a mental institution. Nevertheless, I was appointed a company executive, and even went on to have a fine career as president, proof that I had managed to recover from the breakdown with no lasting ill effects. However, 20 years later, that would be 9 years ago, this mere blip in my own life ended up having very serious repercussions for Reiko. We were in the midst of negotiations for a marriage for her. Reiko was very keen on a particular young man. Suddenly, however, word came from the other party that they no longer wished to pursue it. Now, Reiko is a woman with a fine, inquiring mind, and she decided she simply had to find out why she had been turned down, even though there was no real need for her to do so. In the end, it was the woman who'd been involved with the matchmaking who spilled the beans, even though she shouldn't have. It seems the young man's side had discovered that I'd been in the hospital for a lengthy stay 20 years earlier. They suspected, quite groundlessly, that the reason must be more than simply a nervous breakdown, and, bearing in mind that I'd been the captain of a ship with plenty of temptations around, that I must have been suffering from syphilis. Since Reiko was born the year before I went into the hospital, they surmised she would be certain to have inherited the disease. From the moment Reiko found this out, she became a person transformed. She started drinking. She took up smoking. I tried to tell her it was just a stupid story, that the other side was completely deluded, but that we could make sure by having a blood test. We could go to the hospital to get a full explanation from the doctor. But she wouldn't listen. There was nothing I could say, no scientific explanation I could offer that would give her peace of mind. In a few years, I'll go insane. There's no hope for me. I'll never get married. I'll never have children. That's what she said. And once she started, there was no stopping her. Her brothers and sisters all did everything they possibly could to make her see sense, but Reiko became increasingly unhinged and wouldn't listen to anyone. In the end, we transferred the annex over to Reiko and made her the legal owner. That's what she requested. But for some reason, she said that, rather than living there herself, She preferred to rent the room at a high price and live off the income. I'm not long for this world, but we have enough funds to support our daughter. As you may be aware, the money received as rent from you will go straight to Reiko and be her income. It's a really strange story. I hope you don't mind hearing about it, but in view of the situation, I can only hope you will be good enough to feel some pity for our daughter and decide to stay on. Recently, it seems she's been hanging around Shinjuku a lot. She's been taking some weird drugs, and the whole neighborhood has ended up treating her like an outcast. But what worries us more is her conviction she's destined to lose her sanity because of congenital syphilis. We're at our wits' end about how to help. I feel really embarrassed having to tell you all this. There is just one crumb of comfort, however. Shinjuku may have become her Saturday night haunt, and she might not breeze back home until the morning, but she's always alone when she returns. For some reason, she can't get close to anyone, and as a result, she's never brought a single low-life friend to the house. We are eternally grateful for that. It would be so embarrassing to have some disgusting long-haired hippie, someone you couldn't tell was a boy or a girl, popping in and out of our home. It's rather forward of me to say this, but you seem a fine, upstanding man, despite your youth. Just how a young man should be. Reiko was taking ages to return home that day. Hanyo retired to his bed to read a book, but he couldn't help feeling a bit anxious about how long she would be. He considered going to Shinjuku to look for her, but that would be pointless. He knew all about these hippie types. He'd had dealings with them during his time as a copywriter. They were seekers after meaninglessness, all right, but he could not imagine them having the guts to confront the real thing when it inevitably came calling. They'd ended up in their sorry state for quite trivial reasons. A completely groundless phobia about syphilis, for example, or an aversion to school and studying. Reiko was a case in point. Hanyo felt nothing but utter contempt for these people and all the reasons they put forward to justify themselves. Meaninglessness never intruded into people's lives the way hippies imagined it would. It always arrived in a form far closer to those lines of newspaper print that had turned into cockroaches. This was how he saw it. You think you're on a road, walking happily along, but then you realize you're actually balancing on a railing on the roof of a 35-story building. Or you're playing with a cat when suddenly deep in its wide meowing maw, reeking of fish, you see jet-black ruined streets stretching out before you, like the burnt-out remains of a city after a major air raid. Or you put a ladle of milk right at the tip of a Siamese cat's nose, and just as it's about to drink, you flip the ladle up to drench its face with the milk. Come to think of it, he'd once been very keen on keeping a Siamese as a pet, but somehow he'd ended up having supper in the company of a toy mouse. It seemed to him that those very same rituals, so central to his fantasies, were equally influential in every aspect of the Japanese political and economic system. The same impulses drove the way the government's cabinet meetings were conducted. Questions of national security were resolved according to the same rituals. It's only when a haughty cat is humiliated out of the blue that we gain insight into the full implications of keeping a cat. In short, Hanyo believed that his ideas were all rooted in meaninglessness, and they blossomed into life at the very moment when meaning was created. For that reason, he never once initiated any action on the grounds that it was meaningful. People who ascribed meaning to their actions ended up staring meaninglessness in the face, in a state of frustration and hopelessness. Such people were nothing more than sentimentalists, the sort that couldn't let go of life. When you opened the cupboard, it seemed to Hanyo, meaninglessness was already enshrined there along with the heap of dirty laundry. If you already understood that, what was the point of searching for a life of meaninglessness somewhere else? Hanyo had the feeling he would be offering his life for sale again sometime in the future. Just then, the door of the tea house opened softly. A cat. It was Reiko. Large plastic earrings dangled from her ears, and she was wearing what looked like a Mexican poncho. Her pale neck protruded from among a blaze of red, green, and yellow stripes. "Hi." Hanio welcomed her home like family. "I expect you're starving. Let me make you dinner. You provide a pretty good service for a landlady." "So father told you then," Reiko said, staring at Hanio's forehead. "That obvious, is it?" "Yes, I can read your mind." With this comment, Reiko went to the kitchenette and noisily set to work. Hanio was bored and wanted to keep talking, so they conversed together in loud voices above the sound of splashing water and the chopping of her kitchen knife. "I don't mind coming here to sleep with you from now on," said Reiko. "That sounds nice, but—" "But what?" "The thought of us both waking up tomorrow morning as charred corpses gives me the shivers. I'll leave the gas on. The explosion will ensure we die a clean death. But even in 1001 Nights, they only die after satisfying themselves to the full. One night wouldn't be enough. Greedy boy." There the conversation stopped. Hanio heard a saucepan bubbling away in the kitchenette. "I hope you're not putting poison in that." "Would that be better? They'll discover the arsenic afterward." "What'll it matter, as long as we die together? I haven't given my consent yet. I've agreed to take the annex, yes, but my contract doesn't extend to shacking up with you." She brought in the cooked food, a delicious-looking filet mignon and broth to accompany it, with a small bottle of wine. She watched languorously, like a cat, while Hanio devoured the food. "Is it good?" Reiko asked. "So, do you love me?" she asked in a coquettish tone. "You cook well. You'll make someone a great wife." "Don't be facetious. I'm being serious. I've waited so long for us to meet. You know, I even sent you a letter once. I was certain one day you'd come. I don't know why I could be so sure, but I was. You're that person, aren't you? The one who put a strange ad in the newspapers. The life for sale person. Am I right?" "What? Did you know that I was the person who'd put the ad in the paper when we met at the real estate agent's? How?" "I just happened to drop into the place as I was passing." "I had a photo of you," Reiko replied with a nonchalant air. "A photo? How did you get hold of it?" "You're quite the detective, aren't you? I'm surprised someone like you is so bothered by such petty bourgeois concerns." She said nothing more. But whether he'd met Reiko at the real estate agent's by pure chance or not, it was clear that a photograph of him, taken unawares, was doing the rounds. But why, for heaven's sake, had he unwittingly become a star in this totally unfathomable world? After they had eaten, Reiko came and sat close to him. She took Hanio's face in her hands and peered deeply into his eyes with her own, which were frighteningly large. "So, do you want to catch my illness?" Hanio gave a non-committal response. "I'm going to lose my mind anyway. Who knows? Maybe the two of us getting together will push me right over the edge." Reiko's words made Hanio feel a sudden pity for this young woman who had lost her chance to marry. When Reiko took off her clothes, Hanio was startled by the beautifully translucent quality of her body. There was no sign of the ravages by drugs that he had anticipated. In the subdued lamplight, the skin enveloping that troubled and lonely spirit looked soft and unblemished. Her breasts appeared full, swelling into gentle mounds in a way that lent a feel of something archaic to her nakedness. Her waist was a little thicker than expected, her white stomach rising out of the gloom, overflowing with amiability and richness. Every point touched by Hanio's fingers sent rippling shudders through her body. This Reiko, lying so quietly by his side, made him think of a sorrowful, abandoned child. At the critical moment, a furrow of pain crossed Reiko's brow, as if she were being branded. Hanio was thrown into confusion. He could hardly believe it. The sheet bore a patch of blood in the shape of a little bird. He rolled gently away, determined to say nothing, but it was Reiko who spoke up. "So you're surprised? I certainly am. That was your first time. Reiko got up without a word and, still absolutely naked, like an odalisque, brought back some sweet wine and 2 liqueur glasses on a tray. Now I can die in peace. Don't be ridiculous. Hanyo was feeling sleepy, and his words were beginning to drift. For the moment, he had said enough about life and death. Reiko started to tell him, haltingly, about herself. She had wanted her own tomb like the one in the story, but she needed a companion to share it with, ideally someone who cherished a similar desire. Listening to her, Hanyo realized she was actually a thoughtful, shy woman, even though everything about her appearance and tone of voice suggested otherwise. I had made a personal resolution that I must never love anyone, she continued. If I did fall in love, I'd only end up passing on my illness, which would be terrible. And even if I met someone, and he loved me so much that he didn't mind catching my disease, there would still be the prospect of me becoming a mental patient before long. How sad would that be? So even when someone tried it on with me, I never surrendered my body. I took Hymenol and LSD, and when I got wasted, I came home. I much preferred being in the arms of my mother, who looked after me so sweetly. Besides, if a guy only has a few coins in his pocket, I won't look twice at him, no matter how edgy I may seem. But then again, the ones with any money are all dirty old men. I've wanted for so long to give my virginity to a man who was young and single, and who was willing to pay for my body, to pay for my life, to pay for the beautiful tomb I would make. I had a few other conditions too. It would have to be someone who wouldn't regret catching my illness, someone with no thoughts for the future, someone who was willing to die with me at a moment's notice. The guy had to be willing to buy the whole package. That's why your photo struck such a chord the moment I saw it, and why I wanted to meet you. So how did you get to see my photo? Do you mind? I was in the middle of my story. I expected more of you. Reiko was again avoiding the question. Hanyo threw out an arm and drew her disgruntled face onto his chest. He spoke to her as if he were advising a child. Come on now. You must wake up from this foolish dream. You're still acting like a child. You're a 30-year-old woman, but you cruise around with those Shinjuku deadbeats and hold on to some selfish, hedonistic notion of painting the world blue. But that's far too simplistic. If you turn on a blue light in a tiny room, everything goes blue. But that doesn't mean you've turned the inside of the room into an ocean. The first thing to say is, you're not ill. That's a delusion, a self-indulgent fantasy. Secondly, you are not going to go insane. It's infantile to even consider such a crazy thing, but infantile thinking does not equal madness. Thirdly, it makes absolutely no sense for you to die merely from fear of going insane. Fourthly, no one is going to buy your life. I don't know how you can dare to ask me, a professional, to do such a thing. It's me and no one else who does the selling here. Buy your life? You must be joking. I wouldn't sink to that level. Listen, Reiko, people who buy other people's lives and then try to use them for their own ends are the sickos of the world. They are the lowest form of human existence. I feel nothing but pity for all my clients. But because that's the type of people they are, I've been happy to let them pay for me. But you are simply a 30-year-old child who just lost her virginity. A woman who despairs of life because of some misguided fantasy, and who has not fathomed what it really means to be human. Nothing more than that. You don't qualify. But I don't want to buy your life. I want to sell my life to you. Don't you understand? I'm not a buyer, I'm a seller. Well, I'm a seller too. Well, you're pretty bad at it. I don't pretend to be a pro. Looks like I'm on a winning streak then, Hanyo said. And then the two began to laugh, and so their life together began. All went well at first. Hanyo's attempts at making Reiko see things differently had no effect at all. Reiko would not let go of the belief that she was ill, destined to go mad in the near future, and she resolutely refused to be examined by a doctor. "If I suddenly start having fits and acting insane, kill me immediately and follow me in death. Do you understand?" she would say, and other similarly wild things. Hanyo offered equivocal replies, and to all intents and purposes they spent their days in the way you might expect of a couple of lovers who had just started living together. Whenever they went out to see a film or to take a stroll, Hanyo would try to rein in Reiko's hippie tastes. On their outings together, she would dress in simple, tasteful clothes as if she were a normal young wife. The fierceness in her expression began to give way to glimmers of sophistication. One evening, the couple were out, taking a stroll in a small park in the neighborhood. They were going to view the cherry blossoms, even though many petals had been strewn about in the driving rain the previous day. The park comprised a narrow patch of land right next to a railway track. To reach the entrance, Hanyo and Reiko had to go over a raised level crossing in the road along which they had come. The cloudless sky that day meant it was hot, but the rain from the previous day had studded the ground in front of the park gate with an abundance of petals. Some sodden sheets of newspaper, battered by the rain, lay open in the earth. In the children's play area, between the swings, horizontal bar, and jungle gym, were some enormous cherry trees left over from a previous era. Strangely, there was no sound of children. In the completely still park, the metallic surface of the jungle gym gleamed in the evening sunlight among scattering blossoms. The couple went over to a bench. A figure perched on a swing caught their attention. He was swinging gently back and forth, the petals falling around him. A little old man sporting a neat tie. As Hanyo sat with Reiko on the bench, he observed the old man, vaguely aware of having seen him before. The man was taking peanuts from one of his pockets and popping them into his mouth with a wrinkly hand. All the while, with his other hand, he was holding up a glove puppet. Glove puppets can be rather unwieldy, controlled by inserting an index finger inside the head cavity, while the thumb and middle finger work both arms. The ones on sale in town were invariably animals, cute frogs and clowns that were geared toward children. But the puppet the old man held in his hand was clearly not for a child. It wore a rather high-class scarlet evening dress made of satin, and it boasted a pair of magnificently full breasts. Its head bore the face of a modern woman, like a mannequin, and it even wore vivid lipstick. Holding the puppet aloft amid the fluttering petals and chewing on his peanuts, the old man artlessly moved its head and limbs. He got the head to nod and to swing from side to side. He seemed to enjoy making it go up and down. Then he left the head to sink forward as he munched happily. The puppet appeared to be bowing in deep apology to the old man. Hanyo and Reiko were riveted and found it hard to engage in pleasant banter, so they remained silent. Just then, two trains passed each other in opposite directions with a terrifying clatter. The old man glanced round at the din and suddenly noticed them. A simple, clean shirt collar went around his scrawny, desiccated neck. He twisted his head round as far as it would stretch and locked eyes with Hanyo. Immediately, the old man leapt off the swing, a look of fear on his face. The swing he'd been sitting on ricocheted off him, then crashed back, and he stepped aside, clinging with his free hand to its silvery frame. "You're following me. I thought we had an agreement. You're actually following me." "Not so," said Hanyo. The old man was clearly terrified. "This is a total coincidence. I'm as surprised as you are." "Really? Is that the truth?" The old man moved away from the swing, the puppet still dangling from his hand, and approached their bench with a look of suspicion in his eyes. But the sight of Reiko sitting demurely by Hanyo's side seemed to calm his nerves somewhat. Standing in front of them, he jerked his chin toward her. "Is this lady a client?" he asked. "No. Let me introduce you to my wife. Since marrying, we've been living in this neighborhood." Reiko gave a little bow without saying anything. "Well, congratulations." The old man looked bemused. "May I join you? Please, feel free." The old man sat down on the bench, the puppet on his knee. He seemed at a loss about how to get the conversation going. A hissing sound came from between his teeth. "How can you manage hard things like peanuts with those false teeth of yours?" Hanyo asked casually. The hissing brought back fond memories. "I had these teeth specially made. Their only defect is the noise they make every time I breathe out. Do you want to see them?" "Oh, yes, please." The old man removed the glove puppet and placed it carefully inside his jacket. Then he thrust his fingers in his mouth and pulled out his teeth. What appeared to be canines jutted out long and sharp from both rows at the front, while the rear teeth were serrated like a saw. "They look like the fangs of a vampire," Hanyo said in admiration. The teeth were covered in bits of finely chewed peanut. The old man reinserted them. "The canines on these teeth make eating peanuts a breeze," he explained. "And the rear teeth were made specifically in order to grind beefsteak down to nothing. You see, I'm the sort of guy who lives to eat, but you seem to have turned over a new leaf. I have you to thank for that. I'm amazed. There you were, in such a dangerous business. Now look at you. You're still alive, and married, what's more. I... The old man took out the puppet again and showed it to Hanyo. "Look, this is Ruriko." Hanyo took the puppet in his hand. It was soft and lifeless, and the word corpse rose vividly to his mind. The feel of it was so creepy that he gave it back almost immediately. Upon closer inspection, it didn't really look like her, but as soon as the old man moved his hand and set the head at an angle, its face became the spitting image of Ruriko as she lay on the bed. Hanyo shuddered. What happened to her is so sad. "You must hate me now," said Hanyo. "No, not at all. I'm grateful to you. Ruriko was obviously fated to die, and it was her good fortune to meet you before she did." Suddenly, Reiko pinched Hanyo's thigh so hard he gave an involuntary start, which made the old man jump too. "Hey, don't startle me. I can't take it. I'm too old," the old man said gloomily. "But she was amazing, absolutely unique. She was just like these petals scattering in the setting sun, bright and showy, but cold and vain at the same time. Any man who slept with her could never forget her. Is it any wonder, then, that someone should have wanted to kill her? I don't think so. To hell with the law. We all live under a mountain of guilt. She didn't die by my hand. It was divine punishment that killed her." The old man's ramblings seemed unlikely to come to an end. As a cue to Reiko, Hanyo stood up. "Well, we must be on our way. I won't ask for your address, and there's no point in telling you ours. Take care of yourself." "Just a moment. Please, there's something important you should know." The old man stood up and clutched at Hanyo's sweater. "If you think you can carry on selling your life, you are very much mistaken. You're being targeted. You're being monitored from afar. They'll bump you off as soon as they judge it convenient. Keep on your guard." This encounter with the old man had a disturbing effect on Hanyo. Until now, it had never occurred to him that his own actions were linked together, like a series of interconnected rings. He saw those times that he put his life on sale as a succession of one-off events, like throwing one bunch of flowers after another into the river. The flowers might be carried away in the water, they might sink, they might float all the way down to the sea. He never dreamt they would be gathered up and end up on display together in some vase. That evening, a particularly tender mood pervaded the bedroom. When it was all over, Reiko's eyes were filled with a serene light. "I think I can see myself settling down with you." Reiko was speaking from the heart. What? I thought you wanted this place as a nice little tomb. Well, I did, at first. All I was looking for was someone willing to buy my life. I guess I made such a fuss trying to find the right man that I lost myself in self-indulgent fantasies. But meeting you has been the answer to my dreams. I thought that people would judge me according to how much money I had and nothing more. After all, I was a spoiled young lady with property. There was only one type suitable for me. Someone willing to pay for a sick girl who came with a house. But I couldn't bear the idea of anyone doing it out of pity. The thought that someone might live and then die with me simply because they felt sympathy was anathema. But you're not sick. You're just being kind. I'm not being kind at all. I'm telling you the truth. You're just being silly. Once you find out you've been infected by me, you'll resent me for it, and that really worries me. No matter how kind you are now, the moment I go crazy, you'll change your tune and toss me aside without a second thought. I can see it already. We only have this moment. Now is the only time when I can enjoy the fantasy of us settling down together. I marry you. We have a child. We lead a happy, ordinary life together. That's a dream to savor. Nothing exists but the present. But until I met you, that dream had never even entered my mind. Listening to Reiko go into the finer details of her rose-tinted fantasy, Hanio was surprised by its mediocrity. Reiko would become a happy, loving wife. They would have one child together. The pregnancy would have a few complications, and a caesarean birth would be required. But in the end, they would produce a perfect baby boy. Of course, well before she conceived, Reiko would have stopped popping Hymenol and LSD tablets. Why a caesarean? Hanio interrupted her. Well, I'll be a little old for a first-time mum, so there is a high probability, don't you think? It didn't seem to worry Reiko at all. The comfortable tomb would be replaced by a new family home and the tea room refurbished. The thick bushes around the house would be cut back and the south-facing entrance cleared of most of the vegetation to allow in plenty of sunshine. 1001 nights would be swapped for a manual on childcare. Hanio would commute to a normal job in a company like he used to, and a Pomeranian dog would guard the house while they were out. The traditional rock arrangement in the luxuriant garden would be replaced with a swing on a lawn. Reiko would carefully tend the flower borders around the lawn. As summer approached, she would buy an anthouse for her child at the department store. These anthouses were all the rage now in the shops, and she felt she would have to buy one for the child that would never be granted to her in reality. An anthouse consisted of a small plastic container with transparent sides that revealed the coarse white sandy material packed inside. The base of the container was made of green plastic and decorated with scenes of farmhouses, woods, and hills. It had holes in every side. You inserted a few worker ants into these holes in the base, and then watched through the transparent walls as they burrowed their way through the white sand and made their nest. Everything going on inside was fully visible to the onlooker. It was a toy, designed to stimulate a child's curiosity and spirit of investigation. "It's amazing, isn't it, sweetheart?" Reiko would say to her imaginary child. "Yes, Mama," the child would reply. "Oh my, it's already 5 o'clock. Mama must put the dinner on." "Yes, Mama. Now, sweetheart, you enjoy yourself alone in your playpen, all right? Daddy comes home every day at 6:15, so I have to start cooking. When everything's bubbling away nicely, I'll hurry up and put on my makeup in time for when Daddy turns up. You'll be good now, won't you? Be a big boy and play by yourself for a while." "Yes, Mama." Hanio listened with a growing sense of horror to these vignettes of an imagined life that Reiko was sketching. This was nothing other than a cockroach existence. It was the embodiment of all those bugs scurrying around on a sheet of newspaper. Hadn't he opted for suicide precisely to avoid ending up like this? Of course, Reiko's conviction that she was fatally sick was a complete illusion. But this meant she would have plenty of time to turn the life she was dreaming about into reality. So how could Hanyo escape it? Little by little, and absurd as it might sound, he began to try to convince himself that Reiko really was sick. The very delusions she harbored, he reasoned, were actually symptoms of that sickness. "But they're all pipe dreams," Reiko would say. "I'm just letting myself fantasize because you are so healthy. The only thing awaiting me is insanity." She really did seem to be obsessed by his health. Hanyo was lost for words. There was something bigger going on here, he felt. Even a comfortable little tomb like this, in the small hours of the night, was not totally insulated from the ways of the world. Out there, restless nocturnal life continued to pulse. At the bend of the road on the nearby hill, car horns sounded sharply in the spring night, as if leaping, like the flashing fins of flying fish, from a dark, viscous ocean. Useless. 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 Is there nothing to charm us? When 10 million people come together, they voice not pleasantries, but profound frustration with this great city. Youngsters of the night wriggle in their multitudes like swathes of plankton. The insignificance of human life, passion extinguished. The flavour of pleasure and anticipation lost like gum when you chew it to death. What else can you do in the end but spit it onto the roadside? Some people think that money solves everything, and they make off with public funds. Japan today is awash with such cash, and with all else that glitters. Everyone can lay their hands on money, but they're never allowed to use it for themselves. And it's the same with everything else. Succumb to temptation and make a grab at something, and you suddenly find yourself a criminal ostracized from society. Welcome to the big city. All temptation, no satisfaction. Such was the hell that bared its fangs and whirled around Hanyo and Reiko's comfortable little tomb. Hanyo's thoughts returned to more immediate matters. Could it be that Reiko was the purest, most faint-hearted and most ordinary of young women, and she had simply hit upon this elaborate ruse as an act of self-preservation? Reiko, still eager to play the role of the devoted wife, got up from bed and slipped on a negligée. "Will you have a nightcap?" she asked. "Good idea. Something sweet would be good. How about some cherry liqueur?" "I think I'll join you." She went to the corner cabinet, took out a couple of liqueur glasses, and poured out the drinks. She returned carrying a silver tray, on which were set the glasses filled with the dark red liquid. "Bottoms up." Reiko spoke tenderly, and with a certain audacity in her smile. They clinked glasses and put them to their lips. But just as he was about to take a sip, Hanyo noticed a slight trembling in Reiko's fingers. He quickly knocked the glass out of her hand. The liqueur in her glass spilled onto the silver tray, covering it in dark red. Hanyo took a sniff of his own drink, then emptied its contents likewise onto the tray, now suddenly awash with red liquid. "How could you do such a thing?" Hanyo shook Reiko's shoulders angrily. "But surely you understand. I just thought that now would be the best moment. To die together." Reiko sank to the floor, weeping. "This is not what I wanted," said Hanyo. Hanyo felt his heart beating, even faster than when he faced death on previous occasions. He confronted her, arms folded. "Coward!" she said. "Your life was supposed to be for sale. Why have you changed your mind?" "You're getting things confused here. I don't recall ever selling my life to you. But the main point is, I was paying you. You just don't want to die with me, do you? That's enough of your sob story. Pathetic. If you're that keen to give up your life, at least show a bit more backbone. But whatever you decide, my life is my own affair. I'm quite prepared to sell my life as long as it's my decision. But when some selfish so-and-so messes me about and then even tries to poison me while I'm not looking, I'm not prepared to take it. You've misjudged me. I'm not that kind of guy." "Well, what kind of guy are you then?" Hanyo was stumped. The truth is, he was not sure what kind of guy he was. The angry, puffed-up words he'd just come out with hung in the air like balloons. Until that moment, he simply could not have imagined such thoughts issuing from his own mouth. There had to be some rationale to the way he had spoken, but he couldn't quite make sense of it. Maybe it did all boil down to the fact that, actually, he didn't want to die. But did that mean he was betraying everything he had come to believe in? Death is death, isn't it, whether you put your life up for sale or someone else does the job for you? He might make a big fuss about acting according to his own will, but surely the reason he'd set up his life-for-sale business in the first place was that, having failed to take his own life, he was hoping for the chance to die by the hand of another. He had certainly not started the business from a desire to earn money, and yet here he was being showered with money by all his clients. In which case, perhaps the most desirable way for him to lose his life was as a sudden event, exactly like Reiko had attempted. Maybe the death that Reiko had been plotting simply proved that she was indeed an eminently suitable, kind, and gentle woman, with the purest of intentions.